Hi guys, welcome back. So today we're going to actually step away from a discussion on slavery itself, and we're going to talk about what's happening pre-Civil War that's going to lead to the future conflicts over the institution of slavery that we're going to see. We're going to talk about the Mexican-American War in particular, and how that starts to set the groundwork for trouble in the future. So in your notes, you need to title this Prelude to War Part 4. And I want you to take a moment and kind of look at this picture and see see if you notice anything strange about it. There are people who are on horse and carriage and in buggies, and they're moving westward, and they're moving, and above them is this gigantic angel, this angelic being who is almost leading them the way. This was a painting that was basically promoting this idea of what was known as manifest destiny. Now, manifest destiny literally meant God's will. And the idea was that this was God's will for Americans in particular to move westward, to expand, to find and take over new places, to have more room to grow and to live. And in 1845, this idea becomes very popular. People begin to move westward along what was known as the Oregon Trail. Many of you have maybe even played the video game before, Oregon Trail, or the card game. Now, one individual in particular is John O'Sullivan, and he really popularizes this idea, and he says that it's America's natural right is to expand, right? He's using that term natural rights again, just like Locke, just like Jefferson. He's saying it's our right as Americans to grow and push westward and have this new land and this new territory, and that he thought America should expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So there's a number of reasons for why America should expand at this time, why people who were in favor of the idea of manifest destiny should expand. Now, one thing we didn't talk about before we kind of get to those reasons is something known as the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson, during the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, buys the majority of the United States, as we know of today, from Napoleon during this time. And so anywhere in the brown over here, right there, on that picture right there, anywhere down there, that is the Louisiana Purchase. So we already have the majority of the area. Now, most of that is unorganized territory. They're not states yet, except for parts of eventually Missouri. But it is American territory, and people begin to move westward as a result. Now, those reasons. One is hunger for land. There's this idea that you have to have more and plenty, that you should have this room to really spread your wings and fly, for instance. It also opens up new markets. If we are a coast-to-coast country, then it's easier to ship goods and move to other Native American tribes, for instance, or to sell your goods across the ocean to places like China. You can put them now on a boat from what will eventually be California, and send it across the ocean to other new markets. Also, immigration. People are flooding into the country. It is becoming more crowded, and so people want to expand and have more room to grow. And like I said, finally, that trade with China. One of the big reasons why manifest destiny really happens is because people begin to move out west, and that's mainly because of missionaries. Now remember, just like we talked about with the idea of Christianizing slaves, there's also this idea of Christianizing Native Americans, of bringing the Christian faith to these tribes. And so missionaries begin to move out west. There are places dotted throughout the western half of the United States that were started as Spanish missions. So for instance, in Mexico, which was formerly part of Spain, places like San Diego were there because they were Spanish missions. And we actually get a lot of sports teams' names from the same time period. So, for instance, if you are a baseball fan, you know the San Diego Padres, right? A padre is another name for father, which was what you would often call a Catholic priest, right? So the San Diego Padres are really the San Diego fathers, or religious fathers, and that's why their mascot is a friar. The guy with the robe and the kind of weird haircut that's bald on top, right? Many of these missionaries, they write letters to their congregation. They talk about how great the land is and how wonderful and angelic this place is. And more people begin to kind of move out there because they want the good life. Many of them have been trapped and bound up into cities and hadn't had a very rich and fulfilled life yet. And so they want to move out westward in hopes of finding something better for themselves. As these Americans are moving out west, they're experiencing other groups, other cultures. One of them in particular is the Mexican people, who have the majority of what is today the American Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Texas, California. This starts to become a problem, and mainly because of President Polk in 1844. He really wants these areas, and so we'll end up going to war with Mexico. And the main reasons are A, territory. We want to be able to have as much room as we want to. B, he sees the Mexican government as unstable and that they're easy to kind of push over. And C, Texas at this time, which had been a territory, is accepted into the Union. It becomes a state. And Mexico, as a result, because they're so angry about this, because it used to be part of their territory, they cut off all relations with the United States. And so it really begins to create this friction of two nations who really aren't talking to each other. They don't have diplomatic ties with one another. And so they're not really going to discuss their issues. And so as a result, President Polk just kind of says, well, fine then. I can just expand westward and take over new places, and if you don't like it, well, then I guess we'll go to war about it. One of the areas that they're going to have the most conflict over is the state, or the future state of California. Now, Mexico had taken over for California from Spain in 1834 when they gained their independence. And at the time of all these issues, 7,000 Mexicans live there. So it's not as though it's a small number of people who live in this area. And many made their living trading with the United States. So for them, this had been a profitable institution. The U.S. offered to buy the territory from Mexico, but Mexico actually said, no, like you wouldn't sell, Georgia, for instance, so why would we sell part of our land? This, again, is going to cause problems because Polk really wants these territories, in particular New Mexico and California. And so what he does is he basically tries to provoke a war with them. He sends this gentleman right here, Zachary Taylor, who is also going to be nicknamed Old Rough and Ready. And I can imagine if you look at that picture, you see pretty quickly why he's called that. I mean, the guy is not exactly, a debonair-looking individual. Anyways, so he sends Zachary Taylor down there to kind of invade Texas, to move around, to kind of have his way down there. And a Mexican patrol stumbles upon them and attacks them. And this ends up causing a scuffle. And on May 13th, 1846, President Polk actually goes before Congress and says, they provoked us. They did all these awful things. You should be ashamed of that. You should be upset by this. Let's go to war with them. And Congress grants him the declaration of war. He basically started a war all by himself. Now, most Americans kind of fall into one or two of two camps when it comes to the Mexican-American War. If you are yes in favor of the war, you believe that either Mexico provoked us, which we kind of provoked them, or you believe in the idea of manifest destiny, which means, hey, we have this right? God has given us this right. It's his will for us to move forward and kick those people out. Or you're a Southern Democrat. And why is that important? Well, most Southern Democrats were slave owners, or at least in favor of slavery. And if you want to kind of push slavery out west, you're going to be in favor of this war. Because you think if America wins this war, then that 36th parallel, right, that 36th latitude, that's all new territory that slavery can expand to, which means new states. And if new states, then that means more political power in Congress, right? And so you're really going to be really in favor of this. Now, if you're against it, you're somebody who maybe really does not like President Polk, and he had a lot of his enemies. This is him right here. He's not a very attractive looking man either, right? Maybe you're a Northern abolitionist who kind of sees the writing on the wall and goes, wait a minute, let me think about this. Now, if we take over this area, if we have new states, that means there's going to be the risk of having more slavery out there, which means there's probably going to be the risk of more Southern power in Congress, and we don't want that, right? Or you're a Whig who also isn't in favor of it and doesn't want it to happen because they don't want to lose that political power in Congress. And we're going to kind of jump to the end really quickly and tell you, guess what? The United States wins the war. And in 1848, February of that year, the Treaty of Guadalupe is signed, and the Rio Grande becomes kind of the new Texas border, and that border still lasts today. The U.S. gets New Mexico and California as a result. Polk wanted to invade all of Mexico and take the entire thing, but Congress is like, yeah, cray-cray, we're not giving that to you, you nuts, right? And so they say, no, you don't get that. We're just going to take this, Mexico and California and get those, New Mexico and California and get those areas. This increased the United States territory by a third, right? You can see from the picture down here on the bottom right here, right? You get most of now starting to see what America looks like today. For Mexico, it took 60% of their country away. Think about that. That'd basically be like going to the Mississippi River right there that kind of separates the Louisiana Purchase from the Treaty of Paris, cutting that down the middle and saying the rest of that territory over to the left, it doesn't exist for us anymore, right? We just lose it. That's a big deal. Okay, so, surprise. we're new territory, which means we now have issues of, you got it, slavery. David Wilmot from Pennsylvania is going to write basically what is known as the Wilmot Proviso, right? And the idea is, he says, these annexed lands from Mexico are free. They're not slave, right? I don't care what the 36 Parallel said. They're free. We're not going to do this whole expansion of slavery business anymore. The House passed the measure, and they thought it was great. The Senate, it failed twice. And Southerners start to realize, because it passed in the House, that their power is starting to slip. And if you're a Southerner, you're thinking the North wants abolition at all costs, right? They're willing to do pretty much anything. If you're a Northerner, you're seeing the writing on the wall and saying, listen, the only reason the South even wanted to go to war, right, with Mexico was just to expand slavery, right? They had no real issues of this idea of manifest destiny or all this other stuff. That's garbage, right? They just want to expand slavery. That's all they're thinking, right? They're slavery hungry, if you want to think of it that way, right? And so for them, you're starting to now see this divide again. This idea of slavery as a dividing line is starting to grow even more, and you're starting to see people kind of move to opposite ends of the camp. And you're going to start to see after a while, people really, it's hard for them to even discuss issues like slavery with each other. And so that's it. Now, there's a lot in this PowerPoint, and I totally understand that. And I would actually recommend watching it again after you've taken all of your notes, so you make sure you get it, because this is really important. And the big thing they walk away from in this is to understand that slavery is starting to become such a wedge issue that you're now getting literally sectional divides. Southerners see themselves only as Southerners, not as Democrats or eventually Republicans, which no, most Southerners are not going to be Republicans, or even Whigs, right? They're less about a party affiliation, more about a regional affiliation. Where are you from, right? Southerners are going to see this as a battle for slavery, a battle for their livelihood, a battle for keeping the status quo. Northerners are going to see this as a battle of abolition, or at least stopping slavery's expansion, because the more slave states you have, the more power Southerners are going to have, right? And that's going to be an issue. So from here on out, that divide is very real. That divide is a big deal. And we, from here on out, are going to have this issue time and time again. Any new state, this is going to be a problem, all the way up to the start of the Civil War. Make sure you write any questions you have into your notes. Make sure you have all these notes down there. They're critically important. I will ask you this time and time again on your test. If you have any other questions, bring them to class with you tomorrow. We'll talk about it then. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye, everybody.